She was born with a silver spoon in her mouth, but they left her to rot in the dark. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds over the grand ballroom, laughter and champagne flowing as the city's elite celebrated another year of wealth, power, and untouchable privilege. But upstairs, behind a locked door, a young woman sat alone, her wheelchair positioned by the window, her fingers tracing the cold glass as if she could touch the life she'd been denied. Clara Whitmore, the forgotten heiress of the Whitmore Empire, hadn't been invited to her own family's party. Again, her father, Richard Whitmore, the ruthless billionaire who controlled half the city's fortune, had made his feelings clear years ago. A daughter who can't walk is a daughter who doesn't exist. The words still echoed in her mind, sharper than the accident that had stolen her ability to stand. The doctors had called it a tragedy. Her family had called it an inconvenience. And so Clara had learned to disappear into the shadows of the mansion, into the silence of her own heart, into the dusty corners of a life that had moved on without her. But tonight, something was different. A flicker of movement caught her eye. A man standing in the gardens below, his gaze fixed on her window, not with pity, not with the hollow politeness of the servants, but with something raw, something familiar. Clara's breath hitched. She knew that face. The sharp jawline, the scar above his eyebrow, the way his hands clenched into fists as if fighting the urge to reach for her. Thomas, the man who had once been her father's most trusted driver, the man who had carried her in his arms when she was a child, who had whispered stories of adventure and promise before the world had turned its back on them both, the man who had been fired the day she became useless to the Whitmore name. And now, he was back. Clara's pulse raced as he stepped closer, his silhouette framed by the golden glow of the party lights below. Why was he here? After all these years, after the betrayal, after the silence, what could possibly bring him back to this place? To her? The questions burned in her chest, but one truth cut deeper than the rest. Thomas was the only person who had ever looked at her and seen more than a broken heiress. He had seen a daughter. And tonight, his eyes were saying what his lips never could. I never left you. The music from the ballroom swelled, a cruel contrast to the tension thickening the air. Clara's fingers pressed harder against the glass, her heart pounding as Thomas reached into his jacket. Was that a letter? A weapon? A key? Just as the door behind her creaked open, she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The cold voice that slithered into the room was one she'd know anywhere. Still staring out windows, I see. Pathetic. Clara's blood turned to ice. Her uncle, Victor Whitmore, stepped into the dim light, his smile as sharp as the knife he always kept hidden. You should be downstairs, Clara. Oh, wait, you can't even manage that, can you? His laughter was a blade twisting in her spine, but this time something in her didn't flinch. Because for the first time in years, Clara wasn't alone in the dark. And whatever Thomas had come to do, it was about to change everything. If this story gripped your heart, smash that like button and subscribe, because the truth about Clara's past is even darker than you think. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The door slammed shut behind Victor, his laughter still ringing in Clara's ears like a death knell, but she barely heard it. Her eyes were locked on the figure below, the man who had once been her sanctuary in a world that treated her like a ghost. Thomas. He hadn't aged the way she expected. His face was harder now, lined with the kind of exhaustion that came from years of fighting battles no one else could see. His hands, once so gentle when they braided her hair or fixed her favorite doll, were now rough, stained with grease and calluses. A mechanic's hands, a survivor's hands, and they were clenched into fists as if he were holding back a storm. Clara's breath fogged the glass as she pressed her palm against it, willing him to look up again. He did. Their eyes met just for a second, but it was enough. A silent promise. I'm here. The words didn't need to be spoken. She felt them in her bones. But then Victor's voice slithered back into the room, dripping with venom. Still dreaming about that peasant, Clara? Pathetic. He abandoned you just like everyone else. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to prove he was wrong. But the words died in her throat because Victor wasn't entirely lying. Thomas had left. He had disappeared the night her father fired him, the night Richard Whitmore had looked her in the eye and said, "She's not my problem anymore." The night Clara's world had shattered, yet here he was. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. The butler, a gaunt man with a permanent frown, stepped inside, his gaze flickering between Clara and the window. "Miss Whitmore, your father requests your presence downstairs. The guests are asking about you." His tone was polite, but his eyes were cold. Another command, another performance. Clara's stomach twisted. She knew what this was, Richard's way of reminding her that she was nothing but a prop, a pity case to be trotted out when it suited him. "Tell my father I'm indisposed," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The butler's lips thinned. "He won't like that." "I don't care." For the first time in years, she meant it. Below, Thomas had started walking toward the side of the mansion, where the old servant's entrance was hidden beneath ivy. Clara's heart lurched. He was coming for her. She could feel it. But before she could react, Victor's hand clamped down on her shoulder, his fingers digging in like claws. "Oh no, little cousin, you're not ruining another party for us." His grip was bruising, his breath reeking of whiskey and cruelty. "You'll go downstairs, smile, and play the good cripple. Or I'll make sure that friend of yours disappears again. Permanently this time." Clara's blood ran cold. Victor had always been a monster, but this was different. There was a glint in his eyes, something almost desperate, like he was hiding something, like he was afraid. And then it hit her. The accident. The night her car had skidded off the road. The night her spine had shattered. It hadn't been an accident at all. She had always suspected, but now, looking into Victor's panicked eyes, she knew. He had done something. And Thomas? He must have found out. The realization struck her like a physical blow. Her hands trembled as Victor dragged her toward the door, his grip unrelenting. "Move!" he hissed. But Clara wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was racing, piecing together fragments of memories. The way Victor had always been too eager to take control of the family business. The way he had smiled when the doctors said she'd never walk again. And then there was Thomas, the man who had been there that night, the man who had seen something. The door swung open and the noise of the party rushed in like a tidal wave. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses. Clara's father stood at the center of it all, his arm wrapped around his new wife, a woman half his age who had never once looked Clara in the eye. Richard's gaze flicked to his daughter, and for a second, something like shame crossed his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the usual cold indifference. "Clara, there you are. We were just talking about you. Lies. They were always lies." She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them all what she suspected, that Victor was a murderer, that Thomas knew the truth, that she wasn't just a broken girl in a wheelchair, but a woman who had been silenced. But the words stuck in her throat because Victor's hand was still on her shoulder, his fingers digging in like a warning. One wrong move. And then, from the corner of the room, a figure emerged. Thomas. He wasn't in his mechanic's clothes anymore. He was dressed in a suit, cheap, ill-fitting, but clean. His hair was combed back, his jaw set. He looked like he belonged, but his eyes betrayed him. They were burning, with rage, with purpose. The room seemed to tilt. Victor's grip on her shoulder tightened, his nails biting into her skin. "What the hell is he doing here?" he muttered under his breath. Clara didn't know, but she knew one thing for certain. Thomas hadn't come for the party. He had come for her. And whatever was about to happen, nothing would ever be the same again. The room fell into a suffocating silence the moment Thomas stepped forward. His boots, worn but polished, echoing against the marble floor like a drumbeat of war. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward him, not because he belonged, but because he didn't. He was a scar in this perfect world, a reminder of everything the Whitmores wanted to forget. Clara's father, Richard, stiffened, his smile freezing mid-laugh, his fingers twitching as if itching to call security. But Thomas didn't flinch. His gaze was locked on Clara, and in that look she saw it all. The years of silence, the rage, the guilt, and something deeper. Something that made her chest ache. I never stopped fighting for you. Victor's grip on Clara's shoulder turned painful, his fingers digging in like he could physically stop the truth from spilling out. Get him out! He snapped to a nearby guard, but Thomas didn't wait. He strode forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I'm here for Clara. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara's breath caught. No one had ever spoken for her like that. Not in years. Richard's face darkened. You have no right to be here. Thomas's jaw clenched. I have every right. Because unlike you, I didn't abandon her when she needed me most. The room gasped. Clara's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. This was it. The moment everything would unravel. Victor's voice was a venomous whisper in her ear. Shut him up, Clara, or I swear to God. But she was done being silent. Let me go, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Victor hesitated, and in that second, Thomas's eyes flicked to her uncle, something dangerous flashing in his gaze. Take your hands off her. For the first time in her life, Victor obeyed. His hand dropped, and Clara rolled her wheelchair forward, the wheels clicking against the floor like a countdown. The crowd parted, some in shock, others in morbid fascination. She stopped in front of Thomas, close enough to see the scars on his knuckles, the way his breath hitched when he looked at her. You came back, she whispered. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. I never really left. The words shattered something inside her, but then Richard's voice boomed across the room, sharp with command. Enough. This is a private event. Remove him. The guards moved in, but Thomas didn't budge. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. Before you throw me out, Richard, you should see this. He tossed it onto the table beside Clara's father, the paper sliding to a stop in front of him. Richard's face paled as he recognized the handwriting. Clara's mother's. The room seemed to tilt. Her mother had been dead for years, killed in a car crash, or so they'd been told. But the way Richard's hands trembled as he reached for the letter, the way Victor's face twisted in something like fear, none of this made sense. Thomas's voice dropped to a lethal calm. That letter explains everything. About the accident. About Victor. A beat of silence. Then chaos. Victor lunged forward, his face contorted. You lying bastard! But Thomas was faster. He grabbed Victor's wrist, twisting it behind his back with a force that made the entire room flinch. You want to talk about lies, Victor? Let's talk about the night Clara's car conveniently crashed. Let's talk about the brakes you tampered with. Let's talk about how you've been waiting for her to die so you could take it all. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, the clatter of glasses dropping. Clara's vision blurred, her mind racing. Victor did this to me. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound, deeper than the years of neglect. She looked at her uncle, really looked at him, and saw the truth in his eyes, panicked, desperate, guilty. Richard's voice was a growl. This is absurd. Is it? Thomas's grip on Victor tightened. Ask him about the mechanic's report. Ask him why he paid off the investigators. Ask him why he's been so eager to keep Clara locked away. Clara's hands shook. All these years, she'd blamed the accident, blamed fate, blamed herself. But it had never been an accident. It had been him. Victor's voice was a snarl. You have no proof. Thomas smirked. I have the letter, and I have her. He nodded toward the doorway where a woman stood, older, her face lined with sorrow, but her eyes sharp. Clara's mother's best friend, the one who saw Victor that night, the one who's been waiting to testify. The room spun. Clara's father staggered back, his face ashen. No, but it was too late. The truth was out. And as the guards finally closed in, Thomas leaned down, his voice for Clara's ears alone. I'm not done fighting for you. Not yet. Then he was gone, dragged out by security, but his words lingered, burning in her chest like a promise. The party was over, and Clara Whitmore was done being a victim. What would you do if you found out your own family had betrayed you this deeply? Drop a comment below. Would you fight or would you run? The mansion's grand doors slammed shut behind Thomas, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the hollow silence of the ballroom. Clara's hands clenched the arms of her wheelchair, her knuckles white, her breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The truth, raw, brutal, unavoidable, hung in the air like a storm about to break. Victor's face was a mask of fury, his eyes darting between Clara and the letter still lying unopened on the table. Richard stood frozen, his empire of lies crumbling around him, his wife's trembling hand the only thing keeping him upright. Then Clara moved. She rolled her wheelchair forward, the wheels grinding against the marble like a warning. "Pick it up," she said, her voice low, deadly calm. Richard didn't move. "Pick it up." The room held its breath. Slowly, as if the paper might burn him, Richard reached for the envelope. His fingers shook as he tore it open, his eyes scanning the words inside. And then, his face collapsed. The letter slipped from his grasp, fluttering to the floor like a fallen bird. Clara didn't need to read it to know what it said. The horror in her father's eyes told her everything. She knew, Richard whispered, his voice breaking. She knew what Victor did, and she was going to expose him. Clara's stomach twisted. Her mother. All this time she'd believed her mother's death was an accident, just like hers. But the way Richard was looking at Victor now, with a mix of disgust and terror, told her the truth was far worse. Victor's voice was a snarl. "You always were weak, Richard. She was going to ruin everything, the business, the name, you." Richard's hands clenched into fists. "You killed her." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Victor didn't deny it. Clara's vision blurred, her mind reeling. Her mother hadn't just died. She'd been silenced, just like Clara was supposed to be. The realization hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, her voice, everything, until a single thought cut through the fog. Thomas knew, and he had come back for her. Outside, the distant sound of a struggle, shouts, the scuffle of boots on gravel, snapped her back to the present. Thomas. They were hurting him. She could feel it in her bones. She wasn't going to let that happen. Clara's fingers dug into the wheels of her chair, her muscles straining as she turned toward the doors. Victor stepped in front of her, his face twisted in rage. "Where do you think you're going?" "Out of your way," she spat. He grabbed the arms of her chair, his grip bruising. "You're not leaving, not until this is over." "It's already over," she shot back. "You lost." For a second, Victor's mask slipped, and she saw it. The fear. The desperation of a man who knew his time was up. Then his expression hardened. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Clara." She met his gaze unflinching. "I know exactly what you are, a murderer, a coward, and tonight, you're finished." With a sudden violent shove, she rammed the wheelchair forward, catching Victor off guard. He stumbled back, his balance faltering. Just enough. Clara didn't hesitate. She rolled past him, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She had to get to Thomas. The front doors were just ahead, but the guards were already moving, blocking her path. Clara's breath hitched. Then she saw it. The staircase. The grand, sweeping staircase she hadn't climbed in years. The one that had become a symbol of everything she'd lost. But not tonight. Tonight she was taking it back. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair, her muscles screaming as she pushed herself up, her legs trembling beneath her. Pain shot through her spine, white-hot and brutal, but she ignored it. She had spent years believing she was broken. But she wasn't. Not anymore. One step, then another. The room erupted in gasps, but Clara didn't look back. She could hear Victor's furious shout, Richard's stunned voice, the murmur of the crowd. But all she focused on was the door. Thomas was out there, and she was done waiting. Halfway down the stairs, her legs gave out. She crashed to the steps, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her vision swimming. But she didn't stay down. She couldn't. With a groan, she pulled herself up, her fingers clutching the railing, her body screaming in protest. And then she saw him. Thomas, fighting off 2 guards, his face bloodied but his eyes burning with determination. Their gazes locked, and in that moment, Clara knew. She wasn't just fighting for the truth anymore. She was fighting for herself. Clara's fingers clenched the railing as she forced herself down the last few steps, her legs trembling, her spine screaming in protest. But the pain didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the way Thomas's eyes locked onto hers, the raw, fierce pride in his gaze as he saw her standing. For the first time in years, she wasn't just Clara Whitmore, the broken heiress. She was Clara Whitmore, the woman who had refused to stay down. The guards had Thomas pinned against the wall, but he wasn't fighting anymore. He was watching her, and in that look she saw everything. The years of guilt, the rage, the love he'd never been allowed to show. One of the guards snarled, "Stay back, miss!" But Clara didn't stop. She stepped forward, her body unsteady but her voice steady as steel. "Let him go." The guard hesitated, glancing at the chaos unfolding behind her. The shattered party, the whispers, the way Victor was being dragged away by security, his face a mask of fury. Richard stood frozen at the top of the stairs, his world collapsing around him. But Clara didn't look back. She kept her eyes on Thomas. "Now," she said. The guard faltered. Then slowly he released Thomas. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Thomas was in front of her, his hands hovering like he was afraid to touch her, like she might shatter. "Clara." His voice was rough, broken. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing the blood on his lip. "You came back. I told you I would." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years, of every night she'd cried herself to sleep, of every time she'd believed she was alone. And now, here he was. Here they were. But they weren't safe. Not yet. Victor's voice cut through the tension, venomous even from a distance. "This isn't over, Clara. You think you've won? You have nothing." She turned, her spine straightening despite the pain. Victor was being held back by 2 guards, his face twisted in hatred. "You're still a cripple. You're still nothing without the Whitmore name." Thomas stepped forward, his body tensing, but Clara placed a hand on his arm. No. She didn't need him to fight this battle, not anymore. She rolled her shoulders back, meeting Victor's gaze with a calm that surprised even her. "You're right. I don't have the Whitmore name. I don't have the money. I don't have the power." She took a breath. "But I have something you'll never understand. I have him." She gestured to Thomas, then to the crowd. Servants, guests, even her father's business partners, all watching in stunned silence. "And I have the truth. And tonight, that's enough." Victor's face darkened, but before he could retort, Richard's voice cut through the tension, weak but firm. "It's over, Victor. You're done." The words hung in the air, final. Clara exhaled, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. But she wasn't naive. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. Thomas's voice was low, for her ears alone. "What now?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, she let herself hope. "Now, we leave. No more mansions. No more lies. No more shadows. Just them, and the life they were going to build. Together." Clara turned, her hand finding Thomas's. Their fingers intertwined, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She felt strong. Behind them, the mansion loomed, a gilded cage they were finally walking away from. Ahead, the night stretched out, unknown but theirs. Thomas squeezed her hand. "Ready?" She smiled, and together they stepped into the dark. The night air was cool against Clara's skin as she and Thomas walked away from the mansion, the distant sounds of chaos fading behind them. The Whitmore empire was crumbling, but she didn't look back. She didn't need to. The past was finally where it belonged, behind her. Thomas's hand was warm in hers, his presence steady, unshaken by the storm they'd just survived. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken promise of a future they'd fought for, tooth and nail. Ahead, the city lights twinkled like stars, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the mansion behind them. Clara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of freedom. It was a feeling she hadn't known in years, maybe she never truly had. Thomas stopped, turning to face her. His eyes were soft now, the anger and pain of the past replaced by something quieter. Something hopeful. "What do you want to do now?" he asked, his voice rough but gentle. Clara looked around, the quiet street, the distant hum of life going on, unaware of the battle they'd just won. She thought of the years she'd spent trapped in that mansion, a prisoner of her own family's cruelty. She thought of the girl she'd been before the accident, the woman she'd become after. And she thought of the future, a blank page, waiting to be written. She squeezed Thomas's hand. "I want to live." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she'd endured. Of every night she'd cried herself to sleep, of every time she'd believed she was worthless, of the moment she'd realized she was stronger than they'd ever wanted her to be. Thomas smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. "Then let's go live." And just like that, they walked forward, side by side, not as victim and savior, not as heiress and mechanic, but as two people who had fought their way out of the dark and were finally stepping into the light. Behind them, the mansion's gates closed with a final, echoing clang. Ahead, the road stretched out, endless and full of possibility. Clara didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She was free. If Clara and Thomas's journey touched you, press the like button and subscribe. Activate the bell so you don't miss any stories. See you in the next video.